You see, they're all giant killers. And then Jesus comes and slays, the true ultimate giant.
Nimrod was either a first generation Nephilim or at the very least a later generation giant. I mean, it's quite literally the same, supposed to be the same guy. Then you have to realize that he was thought by every ancient person to be a giant demigod.
All these different tribes that have giants one question is, are they all giants, or these are tribes that giants are among?
That some of these giant clans probably had human followers as well, because if you take the 6'9" height, it's difficult to see what was so scary about Goliath, given that King Saul was likely 6'6" or so.
The people are bigger and taller than we. The cities are large and fortified to heaven. And besides all this, we saw the sons of the Anakim there.
This is very, very fascinating. How tall were the giants in the Bible? Where are they hiding today? Well, Right Response Ministries has a podcast, and they talk about these very topics. It's very fascinating. I reacted to one of his videos about Og of Bashan. He did a great job. So let's get right into it. Very fascinating stuff.
So all of this giant stuff is actually not just some peripheral little oddity. It actually runs right through the center in many ways of the redemptive typological story of the Old Testament. So that's why I do think it's important that we don't just go, oh, that's kind of an oddity, but we really pay attention.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Giants are everywhere in the Old Testament. And we've been preaching through the book of Joshua. We actually just finished with my church, Covenant Bible Church, and, Joshua being a type of Christ, even leading after the death of Moses, who was also a type of Christ. So it's like you have one Christ type who dies, and then there's this 3-day period, it says in 3 days' time, you will cross over the Jordan River. The river signifies, I think of John Bunyan and Pilgrim's Progress. There's this, symbol of death. And so Israel now led by the second, Christ type. So it's like Christ dies in Moses' death. 3 days' time, they cross the Jordan, now under Joshua, a type of Christ. So this resurrection, but they're resurrected not unto rest, but they're resurrected unto war. And you think of the church militant, that yes, we've died with Christ, and yes, we've risen again with Christ, but we've been resurrected in this life, the church here on earth, not to rest, that comes later, but we've been resurrected, given resurrected life for the purpose of war. And then under Joshua, Yeshua, this deliverer, a type of Christ, primarily what he's doing is he's cutting off the heads of snakes. He's going, he even takes his men of war, his chiefs of war, and there's 5 particular kings that unite against Joshua. And he, as the battle's still raging, he wants to, kill them properly, the death that they deserve, and make a mockery of them, an example of them. And so, they're taken captured and they're put into a tomb. Just like Christ, it's a cave in a mountain, and they cover it with stones, just like Jesus laid in the tomb. And then they go and run down all the rest of the men, the fighting men of war, under these 5 kings, and they neutralize the threat. Then they come back, they move the stones, and they take these kings out alive and lay them on their backs. And Joshua has his chiefs of war put their feet on their necks as a sign of God's superiority, his supremacy over all the false gods of the pagans in Canaan, but also as a promise to the people of Israel that they would take heart and be encouraged that God would continue to do this. So Joshua is, he's snuffing out all the kings, but even when Joshua says, I am going to go the way of all the earth, he's going to die, and he gives the allotments of land as inheritances to each of the various tribes of Israel. Not all the enemies are gone, but there's the significant threat has been neutralized. These kings have been cut off, but there's still inhabitants in each of these various inheritances of land given to each of the respective tribes of Israel. So they're expected to finish the job. And I think of that in the big picture of Christ and his life, his death and resurrection, that he has neutralized the lethal portion of the threat.
Wow. Yeah, Joshua did not mess around, though. He showed an example. And a lot of times we like to think about, well, God's not like the God of the Old Testament. He's all about grace and mercy now, just loving everyone. You can do whatever you want. No, that's not the case. There are so many consequences to the actions that you do, and you're going to face them. Yeah, we are under a new covenant, but God is still the same God. He's a righteous God. He's a just God. And yes, we are thankful that Jesus paid the price that we deserve. What an amazing reminder.
The lethal weapon that Satan possessed has now been, stripped from him, that he has crushed the head of the serpent. But that doesn't mean that there's not any more battle left to do. Now the church is going to go and run him down. It's the strong man, right? If you're going to plunder the house, first bind the strong man, and that's what Christ has done. But the house still needs plundering, and there are various enemies along the way, but the big enemy has been taken out. And that's I feel like that's what you see with Abraham. You see it with Moses, with Joshua, and David, who also is a type of Christ. You see, they're all giant killers. And then Jesus comes and slays, the true ultimate giant. And then we, true Israel, the church, are going to run them down. We've inherited the earth. The meek inherit the earth. But we have to have this mindset of we're still at war. It's not time to rest yet. And so you're absolutely right. There's spiritual implications. It's fun to talk about, but it's not just fun to talk about. It'll preach.
I mean, yeah, a lot of the speculations with the giants don't really have anything to do with your salvation, I would say, or your viewpoints on the giants don't have anything to do with your salvation. But all of the Old Testament ties into the New Testament. There are so many foreshadows that you can look into that points to Christ. It's all over the Old Testament.
All right. So tell me a little bit more about Nimrod, because you said something, Ben, just a second ago that kind of threw me off, because it sounded like you said something that might be pre-flood, but then you also said that maybe he's accredited with founding Nineveh and Babel and these other cities, which would be post-flood. So what were you saying there? Can you clarify that?
What was the pre-flood thing that I said?
Maybe I just got confused. So Nimrod was after the flood. I'm
Yes.
just clarifying. Okay. And mighty man of renown, was he, are we saying that he was first generation Nephilim, that like he is half fallen angel, or are we saying that he's one of the giants down the line?
So I think that maybe he is a first generation Nephilim because of the way that his genealogy is spelled out in Genesis, where it says that Cush fathered Nimrod. It's this really interesting thing. It says Cush fathered Nimrod, who was a mighty hunter before the Lord. And then when it goes into Cush's generations, Nimrod is not mentioned at all. And so it does make me wonder if there was some kind of bastardization that was attributed to Nimrod, because perhaps Cush offered up his wife. This is like completely speculative, by the way. We have no way of knowing if this is true, but it would just be one way to try to
Thank you for the clarification. But it's fascinating.
Harmonize these two data points that seem to be at least a little bit finicky, where maybe Cush offered up his wife to one of the fallen angels as an offering, and Nimrod was the product of that offering. Or I have heard some Roman Catholics say that their idea is that the fallen angels actually possessed human men, and that was how they achieved this union. I don't think I really give that much credit, but it is what it is. It's an idea. And that was how the Nephilim were produced, with possessed men who were inhabited by fallen angels with normal women. That could help explain the genealogical differences, but the essential truth is still there, and that's that Nimrod was either a first generation Nephilim or at the very least a later generation giant, if the story is to be believed, which of course it is to be believed. And then if you also take that and harmonize it with the other myths that are clearly alluding to the same character, even with Ninurta being the god of the hunt in Mesopotamia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's quite literally the same, supposed to be the same guy. Yeah. Then you have to realize that he was thought by every ancient person to be a giant demigod, essentially.
That is crazy that Nimrod... That is crazy that there's so many other writings about Nimrod. And he's just barely mentioned in the Bible. Yes, he's mentioned, but the fact that he could be a Nephilim type descendant, this giant, this great hunter, or there's something else playing at hand, but I would love to know what you guys think in the comments for sure.
Who was able to even build mountains in the Mesopotamian myth as a sort of insult to the God who sent the flood. And that, of course, reminds us of the Tower of Babel.
Yeah,
Wow.
even we go into quite a bit of detail surrounding Hercules and Inerta and Nimrod in an upcoming episode of Haunted Cosmos.
Which episode?
Episode 6 of season 2
Hmm.
is going to be devoted to we just recorded it actually, the giant lore of the Bible, essentially the giant history of the scriptures. And then the 7th episode of that season will be branching out into really far-flung giant folklore and mythology proper that goes out across the world, even into the modern day, in that 7th episode. So even in that, we don't have our notes in front of us here, but if you compare Hercules and Inerta and the 11 tasks and 12 tasks,
Yeah.
you find so much overlap with this time period and the hunting, trope, that there's at least a compelling, like, wow, what if they're actually talking about Nimrod? And,
Right.
and just the same way that the flood myth, many of them recapitulate Noah into a different mythological character.
And let's not forget that when Nimrod was at large in the world, everyone was able to speak the same language and understand each other, at least for a portion of his life. So it would make sense that after their language is confused, they disperse, and the myth of Nimrod becomes corrupted here and there, exaggerated here and there. He becomes a hero instead of an anti-hero.
Yeah.
It all makes perfect sense.
Right. But then by the same logic, you could say, well, maybe they caused him to be a little bit deified or Nephilified. Or they gave him a little bit more strength or height compared to what he used to be. Right? Couldn't you say that? I don't know.
When you think about how humans work with stories.
Yeah.
Totally. You think of Hercules and it's like, okay, his father is a god, like, and in the case of Hercules, both his father and mother, but the point is that, like, he's a demigod. He's kind of like half man, half god, that he's, he's flesh and blood. He actually is mortal. He can die, but he has this divine, godlike, angelic strength. And it's like, well, I mean, there's so many stories like that with so many cultures geographically spread way out and very, very.
Didn't C.S. Lewis have that kind of thought process? What if, like, the demigods of Greek mythology kind of play into what if those were the sons of God, the Nephilim?
Old, that it makes you think maybe it's not just a coincidence. I think part of the problem is that, we think of the ancients, we think of people from very long ago as being that they were all stupid. We just think they were all stupid and that we're so smart. But these are people who are keeping records. Sure, I'm sure they had some concept of entertainment like we do today. But even when you look at things like Beowulf, that was perhaps meant to be entertaining and meant to be fictional, it doesn't have the detail. But then you look at other pieces of old literature, and it's like, well, this seems like they're trying to account for history and not just a made up story. And so all that makes perfect sense to me. Do you guys know anything about Arba? That he's the father of Anak, and then Anak coming down, the Anakim coming down his line. That's where we get Goliath. Did you guys discuss any of that?
No, I read briefly some stuff about Arba, but I couldn't remember it.
I've never heard.
I got too enthralled with the Anak stuff.
Yeah, with Anakim and Nephilim and
right. Yeah. So okay, well I'll talk about Arba in a second, but real quick, you guys have named several tribes. Can you do your best? It doesn't have to be exhaustive, but all these different tribes that have giants one question is, are they all giants, or these are tribes that giants are among? And how many of these tribes are there? I kind of want to see if we can get into classifications of giants and even discuss from the scripture as much as we can, but then maybe a little bit of speculation about sizes of these giants and even skills. Like Nimrod was, a hunter. So talking about classifications or tribes of giants, sizes of giants, and then various skills, or even, I don't know, supernatural abilities that they may have possessed.
I like the idea that the giant clans, because of their association with false worship, had a hobby of collecting people, and that they liked to collect human followers, like full normal people followers, as their basically like their servants and their worshipers, and tried to establish, this common story we see through history that the king or the ruler is somehow the son of the gods, or he's semi-divine. He's, like Pharaoh. The sun god was my third cousin twice removed, kind of thing. And so I like the idea, or I think it's coherent with history and scripture, that some of these giant clans probably had human followers as well, mixed in with the clans and the tribes, that they were interbreeding even, but that they also demanded worship of them. So you see like the Zuzim, the Rephaim, the Anakim,
the Emim.
Zuzim means tall ones, something like that. A lot of the giant kind of association is even built.
Long neck.
Right.
Yeah. Like
Even I
these
think
are big people.
I think like Girgashite is another one. Hivite, the Gathites, of course, the sons of Gath. And then of course the Canaanites and the Philistines. We know that the Philistines had giants as well.
Even one in terms of size and classification, there is a kind of thread that I find that I don't think is that plausible. I think is more exaggeration, and that's, I believe, in the Enoch tradition. In the book of Enoch, I think there are examples of giants that are hundreds of feet tall. And I don't know that I necessarily would go that far.
That just doesn't make any sense. I've heard that. And I know I really do need to read the entire book of Enoch, because I think that will just help me to understand exactly what's in it. I've heard so many people talk about it, but never got around to it. But it's just physically impossible if you say that they're, taking the daughters of men, or that's different compared to the sons of God.
Into Enoch a little bit, and it depends on, I forget the name of the measurement. Ben, you might know, but he says thousands of blank, whatever this unit is.
Right.
That it depends on like what is that? Is that, is it equivalent to a centimeter? Then maybe, but if not, then, depending how you interpret the actual, like the Bible will say a cubit, and a cubit is about, a foot and a half, 18 inches. But Enoch uses, I can't remember the word, but a particular term that's a unit of measurement that apparently, I mean, you would have to assume it would be small, but you would have to assume it would be really small, like a centimeter. Yeah. Right. And then you get giants that are like 90 feet tall. If it's a foot, you're talking like thousands of feet giants, which that one's hard to swallow. Go ahead.
There's the whole, this is a classic YouTube or memed kind of ancient history as spooky and supernatural and weird, where it's like the plateaus are tree stumps.
Yeah.
And
there's no forests left in the world. All the mountains were forests.
They're 100-foot tall. There are 1,000-foot tall giants, and they chop down these plateau trees and look at all the. So I think a lot of that is just, mythology, people being speculative and trying to get clicks.
You know what though? To your point, there is an important scriptural example of a unit of measure changing dramatically.
That changes the story.
Yeah, it completely changes the story. So, and it's Goliath. It says, and I believe the ESV uses the Septuagint, where it says that he was 4 cubits, and a span, or a span or something like that,
like 6'9".
Yeah, which would be 6'9". No, the Septuagint was translated in Alexandria, and Alexandria used a different unit of measure or they used an Egyptian cubit as opposed to a Hebrew cubit, which was longer per cubit. So it was actually, if you go by the Hebrew cubit, Goliath would have been 9 feet, 9 inches.
More like 10.
Right. Because the oldest Hebrew text that we have corresponding to that passage in the Old Testament, which is later than the Septuagint, by the way, says that he was 6 cubits and a span, which would be 9 feet.
But I thought, though, that they found it was the same when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls explaining this. Am I wrong?
9 inches. So the idea is that the Hebrew scholar who was putting it back into Hebrew is noticing the fact that the Alexandrians used a different measure for cubit. Yeah. And so he, to try to be consistent, to do the right thing, is putting it back into the Hebrew measurement so that his audience would understand what the Egyptians wanted to convey.
And this is important because if you take the 6'9" height, it's difficult to see what was so scary about Goliath, given that King Saul was likely 6'6" or so.
He was 6.5 feet tall.
He was like a head taller than everybody in that day. So why would Goliath at 6'6"? I mean, we have people taller than, I've known people taller than that. We have people in our church taller than that.
Right.
So, you know,
And I don't think that they could fight effectively with a spear that weighed 50 pounds,
right,
and with armor that weighed
Right.
160
2 to
pounds.
3 inch diameter. You know, kind of.
Right. Well, this is one verse that I think is helpful to that end. It's Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 28. It says, "Where can we go up? Our brethren have made our hearts melt, saying, the people are bigger and taller than we. The cities are large and fortified to heaven. And besides," so that is in addition to what's already been stated, people are bigger and taller than we. And besides, we saw the sons of the Anakim there.
Yeah. Yes.
So the point is, that it's not, oh, there are giants, and giants are guys who are 4, 5, 6 inches taller than we are.
Yeah.
Right. Because I mean, there's an argument to be made that at this time, that people in general were a little bit shorter than maybe the average man today. So if the average man today is whatever it is, 5'9", 5'10", or even let's say 6 feet, then maybe, it was like 5'6", 5'7", and so, okay. So, the average guy in Israel is like 5'7". And, if somebody's, 6 feet tall, that's, well, okay, well, that could maybe account for part of that verse. And the reason why I like this verse, again, Deuteronomy 1:28, it made our hearts melt, saying the people are bigger and taller than we. So if there's, if all the people are only 5 inches taller, but it's all of them, that is still intimidating, because it's like, pound for pound, man for man, these guys are bigger and stronger than us. But that's not the only thing that's said. It's the people are bigger and taller than we. The cities are large and fortified to heaven. And besides all this, we saw the sons of the Anakim there. And that's what actually terrifies them. And that's where you get the language of the Anakim. That's where you get the language of, like, we were like grasshoppers,
Right.
And they said, we saw ourselves. We viewed ourselves as though we were grasshoppers to them.
Wow, that is so fascinating. So many things. Yeah, I that's the first time I've heard that description of Goliath, of when they found the other manuscripts, and it says 4.5 cubits long and 4 in a span or whatever, and that averages out to be 6'9". But they're saying maybe that was just a different metric system. So maybe he's actually 9'9". So like, wow, very interesting. But anyway, guys, I would love to know what you think. I encourage you all to keep on trusting in Jesus and know that he is good. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. Now let's remember Jesus loves you.